Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm back well enough to do these, at least. I still might be coughing through them. My apologies. And I'm also really sorry I missed 2 weeks in a row. I don't think I remember missing 1 week ever, let alone 2 in a row. So hopefully that'll never happen again. But anyway, there's a ton of questions, so let's jump right in. I'll start out over on YouTube. C. Cooper said they're getting a GBA consoleiser on the next round of sales, and the question is, will the EverDrive GBA X5 make it so you could play all your Game Boy games, or will you need a separate one for Game Boy Color, and then the Game Boy Advance one? So I would recommend getting one for each. I believe you could use some kind of emulation on the GBA one, but it's never going to be the same exact experience. And if you're putting the money into getting something as amazing as the GBA consoleizer, you're going to want to make it as much of a one-to-one experience as possible. So you'll have to get one of the Game Boy one, which is Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Advance one separately. And this is a physical limitation. I think there would have to be some kind of weird switch mechanism built into the pins in order to have one cart to do both. So it's not like Crix isn't just trying to double dip or anything like that. It's just kind of just the way it is. And also, C. Cooper said, thank you for doing these videos. No, C. Cooper, thank you for watching and supporting. I appreciate it. Krebstar had 2 questions. First, what is the easiest way to get Swiss and the Game Boy interface running on a GameCube? Should they put in a region switch and use the card reader or action replay method, or is there something easier that doesn't involve taking apart or hard modding the GameCube? So that's an easy one. Just get an action replay disc, and I believe you could get disc only. They just have to be past a certain revision, and then any SD card reader for the GameCube. You can get them as packages together, but they're generally a little bit more expensive, or if they're out of stock, then they skyrocket on eBay and then come back down in price just like everything else. But that's the easiest way to do it. And then on that SD card, that has to be 2 gigabytes or smaller, but you could put Swiss on that, and you rename Swiss.doll to autoexec.doll. So that's pretty much all you'd have to do is, if you found that kit for a reasonable price, I think they're normally like $35. You just leave the action replay disc in the GameCube, leave the 2 gigabyte card in that, and then you boot right to it, and you could access Swiss and the Game Boy interface right to it. The other thing you could do is get one of the SD to SPI, or I forgot exactly what it was called, but it plugs into the bottom of the GameCube, and you could get you could put a micro SD card of whatever size you'd like into it. And I think the easiest plug and play, no mod required way to go about doing this is do what I just said, and then also have the SD card in the bottom with all of your games on it. And that way all you have to do in Swiss is change the SD cards, which is just 2 buttons, and then access it from there, so you don't have to swap anything out. Or if you do need your memory card, you could just pull out that memory card reader and use a real memory card on there. So that's the easiest plug and play version. Of course, you could look into Dan's new optical drive emulator, but you specifically said something that doesn't involve hard modding. And your second question was, at some point you really want to get an RGB mod, a Sharp Twin Famicom. I love those. Are the mod kits and installation the same as a regular Famicom? No, it's the NES RGB board is the same, but I believe there might be some different installation parts required. Check Tim's website. He should make it pretty obvious what's what. But the biggest bonus is you could use the port that's already in the back of the Sharp Twin Famicom, which means it's a no-cut mod. You could just install that thing, make yourself or have yourself a custom cable made, and then that's it. So the only other thing about those is you're going to want to replace the belts on the drive array, I think. I haven't done that myself, but practically everybody I know has a Twin Famicom, and that's what they say. So give both of those a shot. The GameCube's going to be easier than the Twin Famicom, but I think you're really going to like that one. Over on Patreon, Dave Phillips asked, do I know of any HDMI selector switches that support 4K at 120 hertz? No, and I've kind of bowed out of the HDMI switch testing because it's very time consuming and expensive. And for my personal setup now, I don't really need it. So I'll jump back into it when I have more time, or I guess when I really need it, because I have just a very long backlog of other stuff I need to be working on. However, Dirk Swizzler, Dave, has a thread over on Shmups where people are actively looking for this stuff. So I would definitely check that one out. I'll try to leave a link to that in the description. But if not, just go to the Shmups hardware thread and look for modern equipment for HD switching and stuff like that. And you'll see the post by Dirk Swizzler. Baba Yaga says, a few questions about the Dreamcast and video cables. They found an RGB SCART cable, but a disclaimer that it won't work on SCART TVs. Are there any SCART RGB cables for the Dreamcast that work on a consumer European SCART TV? So the only reason that it might not work is if it doesn't include voltage in the cable, or it might not work in 480p on SCART TVs. But I'm not really sure why it says that, and you're definitely going to want to buy cables from Retro Access or Retro Gaming Cables, and I believe the Foo might still be selling the SCART cables as well, but definitely don't be picking up cables from some random source because no telling how they're being built, and you could definitely damage equipment if you use the wrong cables and stuff like that. But the only thing that would stop it is some of these older TVs require voltage to switch from 16:9 to 4:3, and some I think some have some issues of detecting RGB versus composite video, but I mean it should pretty much work. So not really sure. You said you did find an original Sega RGB SCART cable and an original S-video cable, but people say they suck and use VGA. So what they mean is, generally speaking, unless you have one of the newer SCART cables that just came out in 2019, from SCART and S-video you're only going to get 240p and 480i. Whereas VGA, you're going to get 480p as well. But if your TV isn't compatible with 480p, it doesn't matter anyway, so S-video is going to be excellent. Not quite as good as RGB, but in almost every case, I would say in every console except the N64, I would say the jump from composite to S-video is way bigger than the jump from S-video to RGB in 480i and 240p, of course. You said you're so tempted to test the RGB cables from Retro Access, but they do state they won't work with consumer models. Definitely want to check on that, and you definitely want to make sure that you leave it in 15 kilohertz mode, the 480i mode, because I'm not sure if that would hurt your TV if you put it in the other mode. And you said you also have problems finding stuff for your current model, a JVC TV. Any help on this subject would be great. The only thing I know about those is that there's one seller out of New Zealand that makes some pretty great RGB or RGB input cards, both SCART and BNC. So I would just look up your model number, see what options it has, and then see if that one seller on eBay makes a card for yours, and that would allow you to get RGB in for that one. So hopefully I answered all your questions. I'm trying to get through these. There's a lot this week, obviously, some catching up. So if I missed anything, please let me know and I'll re-answer. Doomleg asked if there's any way to connect a modern PC to a CRT with the RGB SCART input. Doomleg has a USB-C to VGA adapter. Would a regular VGA to SCART cable or the Mr. SCART cable work? Or do I need to make a specific cable or converter? So the problem with all of those is you're going to need a sync combiner. And this is one of the posts that Steve from HD Retrovision posted on their website that I reposted on Retro RGB a few months ago. And combining sync, depending on a million factors, could be as easy as twisting two cables together with a resistor, or it could require circuitry. So generally speaking, I would recommend that people unless you really know what you're doing, you have an oscilloscope, you're willing to test some of this stuff, you can get something like an Extron Crosspoint, an Extron RGB interface that basically goes from VGA and breaks it out to BNC. So then you can get a BNC, so it would be RGBS to SCART cable. And you would probably want to test the voltage on that too, because I would assume that you would need one resistor in the SCART cable on the sync line. But basically, it's a voltage and signal issue. Number one is voltage. If you put double the signal, H and V combined, you're doubling the voltage, and many TVs would not be able to handle that. And on the other side is the signal itself. You can't normally just twist two wires together. You have to have a circuit to tell it how to talk to the device. I'm oversimplifying here. And of course, you have to be able to run your modern PC in a resolution that a CRT can understand, which gets super complicated. Back when I first started researching this, I was just trying to do direct 320 by 240 resolutions, and I couldn't get anything to do that. There was only special video cards with special software that could. And now people are realizing that you could, use super resolutions, which are things like 2000 horizontal and 240 vertical, which a CRT just interprets as whatever the math would be, so probably a 320 image. But that's something that you're really going to need to research, and it depends on your PC, your video card, and your entire solution. So this could be an entire video and instructional series on its own, so I could only point you in the right direction. So to break it down, the two things that you need is a sync converter. Alternatively, you could try to find a USB to component adapter and then try to get a component to RGB converter, and then you don't have to worry about voltage at all. But no matter what conversion solution that you use, you're going to have to make sure that your video card can output the proper signal for an older 15 kilohertz CRT to understand. Nick had a question that I do not have an answer to. Nick just bought a Dragon City Saturn PSU, and it has a switch on it to go between 3 volts, 3.3 volt, and 5 volt. The installation guide is in a different language, so they were wondering if I could clarify what mode they're supposed to put the switch in. I have no idea. I've never messed with Saturn power supply replacements. I try to always leave the OEMs in there and rebuild those. I do understand that there's reasons not to, different regions and stuff like that, swap the PSU rather than have to use a step up or step down converter. But I've never messed with that, and power is always dangerous. And I don't just mean literally dangerous, like if you touch it, you get zapped. If you put the wrong signals through electronic equipment, even too low of a voltage, you could potentially do some damage. So I would contact wherever you got it from or ask other people using it. And I would also ask why, just to get a better understanding. So I'm sorry I don't know the answer, but I hope you get that worked out. Jason D says they're loving the Smoke Monster Mr. videos and are looking forward to getting one. What, in my opinion, are the top features missing from the NES, SNES, and Genesis cores that were not mentioned in the videos? For example, I read that MSU1 is missing from the SNES core. What else would I be missing if I got rid of my consoles and ROM carts? So first and foremost, it's your stuff. Do whatever you want with it. But it's always my opinion that whenever people end up getting rid of their consoles, they always regret it at one point or another. Always. So, whatever you choose to do is your business, and I'm not going to shame you for anything. But I would consider doing something more like packing them up very nicely in a box somewhere so they don't take up too much space, but holding on to them. But to answer your direct question, I don't think anything's missing. I think MSU1 would be nice. I mean, technically it's there on the SD to SNES or FX pack, and not there on the Mister. But I kind of look at these things as like, look at how much we've gotten. My personal things are what would I need to stop using my real hardware? MSU1 and 32X support, which I don't think anybody's working on at the moment, which I believe is super complicated, and I don't even know if the Mister would be able to do that, because you'd have to run a full Genesis core and a full 32X core, and for 32X CD, you'd also have to have the full Sega CD core. So that would be the only things that I could think of off the top of my head, but they're all fully featured, and I just completed Super Metroid on the SNES core, and I don't think I could tell a difference at all. The wall jumping wasn't quite as good as I'm used to, but it could also be that I'm just out of practice wall jumping. But every other part of the game felt just like real hardware. So the Mister team is doing a phenomenal job. And either way, I would suggest picking one up and just, being part of the early or I guess midway adopters now. Early adopter would have been last year when I first messed with it. But it's a stable piece of hardware and something that I really love using. Brento also had a Mister question. They said they just finished watching the Smoke Monster review of the NES FPGA Mister core. Yeah, what an awesome video, by the way. I obviously already knew everything that was going in there because I use mine regularly, but I still just enjoyed the shit out of that one. I enjoyed all of them, but for whatever reason, the NES one stuck out. But to get back to your question, you remember me and some others mentioning input lag going from a controller to the Mister. Brento is looking for a good way to play NES, but they'd rather use a different setup if the Mister introduces any noticeable lag. Do you know if this is still the case? So there's a few different teams of people going about this issue. And they're going about it from different solutions, and they're all really achieving great results. One of them is the Blister, which uses adapters from the Bliss box. That's what I used when I just completed Super Metroid, and I believe that's super low latency. It's 6 milliseconds or less. And please don't let that number 6 bother you. You know, you're talking about milliseconds. And the way that the SNES pulls its controller, I don't know if it would ever be noticeable even to professional gamers. There's another solution out there that's one single controller supported only at a time at the moment, but I believe that's 1 or 2 milliseconds. And then there's a few other people talking about different ways. So I guess the only thing I wouldn't recommend is just using a generic USB controller through a generic USB hub. I would just research whatever is the most cost-effective solution for you. For me, the Blister, I had already purchased all of the BlissBox adapters like 5 years ago, and no disrespect, I just never used them because I don't use software emulation for anything other than arcade. So for me personally, it made the most sense because now I get to utilize all these adapters that are wonderful and are sitting in a box somewhere. For you, maybe looking into that other USB adapter. I think I might have one. I thought I had one here somewhere. I don't know. Maybe is this it? Yeah, I think this is it. The snack or something like that. But definitely check this out and see what or check all of the solutions out. Go to mraddons.com. That's where I get all my stuff from, and kind of figure out what's best for you. Also, you added, my only criticism of your show is that it didn't exist back when I was first getting into retro gaming. So if you don't mind building a time machine and throwing some episodes into it, that would be nice too. That's hilarious. You know, when I meet people, there's 2 things I generally hear for the first time. Number 1 is usually, do you have any idea how much money I've spent because of you? Which I both feel bad about and don't, because I try really hard to only make recommendations that I believe in. But the other one is, I wish I'd found your site sooner so I wouldn't have had to waste money on all that garbage I bought before I knew what to actually buy. So, you know, both of those things make me happy and sad at the same time, I guess, because I wish I was able to market this stuff better so I could help more people. But glad I was able to help you, and hopefully I pointed you in the right direction for the Mr. stuff. SB Hive said they're looking to start backing up their CD-ROM games, starting with DOS, but moving on to Saturn and PlayStation. Is there any particular format that's better than the others? It seems that there are choices between BinQ, IMG, and ISO formats, and others, by the way, but they can't find any information on which is the best or what the differences are. On top of this, is there a particular program you lean towards that won't flood your computer with ads? So I'm going to add another one to it. Also, what drive should you use to rip these? All of this is pretty complicated, and I think the best thing to do is to research the redump sets and see that the tools that they used and the software as well as the hardware, and kind of start from there. And it might be different tools and different formats for each console. So for as far as hardware goes, there should be one CD-ROM drive that would be good enough for everything, except for Dreamcast. I think you might need a different one if you ever move up to Dreamcast. But as far as that goes, there might be different software and then different file formats that you save each in, but there could be differences for each. So I would just go and research some of the redump stuff and see what they did. And hopefully one day I could research this more myself and do a video on it or something, because I think a lot of people, while we all appreciate the efforts of teams like Redump, so there's just something weird about wanting to back up your own CD. And I realize it's ridiculous. 99% of the time it's going to be a one-to-one perfect exact version as you could download from the Redump, but I'm 100% with you on that. I know it's weird, but I like to rip my own stuff, and I like to know that I've done it the best way, and I don't do it that often. So to be honest, I usually get lazy and text a friend of mine that's good at it and say, hey, I got a PC Engine thing. What's the best software for it? And then I do it once and then forget about it. So I guess I would just go down that path, and hopefully someday I can get some really good documentation. Maybe when the wiki's up, that could be a central place for people who post guides on exactly how to rip stuff for each console. But good question, and good luck with your ripping. Tom Linkletter said that they're a new owner of the OSSC and are having trouble with it. They've downloaded Firebrand X's profiles, but they all give them a black screen by default. It just doesn't seem to want to display anything in the 256 by 240 optimized mode when any kind of line doubling is enabled. Pass-through seems to work fine. Okay, so that means your OSSC is still working. And the generic 4x3 mode works up to the Line 3X mode. Are you just out of luck with regards to the resolution your monitor supports, or are there some other settings you could play with to try and get it working? Unfortunately, you might be out of luck. That's one of the only issues that, in fact, I believe my only complaint of the OSSC is it's not something that's just going to be compatible with everything. And there's no way to really solve that. So, if you're getting 3X and 4x3 mode, you're still probably getting a good picture of, better than other solutions. So I think I would just try a different monitor or maybe a couple of TVs around your house just to see if you get different performance issues for each. But I think if you found something that works, you kind of have to just deal with it. For me, a lot of mine don't like any of the 1600 by 1200 modes, so I got to put them by the 1920 by 1080. I actually don't know really the difference between the two. I really dug in deep into direct capture, and some of the features of the OSSC that go past that I didn't spend too much time on because I didn't have the extra time and I was lazy that Firebrand X did all the work for us. So the only other thing to add, you said if it helps any, you've tried the profiles for NES RGB, SNES, Genesis, and Saturn, and they all had the same issue. So that's the only other thing I would have mentioned is make sure it's not just like a SNES Nintendo issue, and that your Genesis or PlayStation works fine. I had one monitor that would only work with the PlayStation. I still don't really understand what that was all about, but that could have been my settings because that was a few years ago. So sorry about that, but hopefully maybe if Firebrand X is listening, he could have some extra tips or anything like that. But at the very least, generic 4x3 mode in Line 3X is still a very good picture. Oliver Wilmot said they got a Mortal Kombat 2 arcade board. I am very jealous. It's one of the ones I really want. That they got while working in a video game store in about 2002. Lucky bastard. You probably got it for very cheap then. You've never used it once. And could I recommend a super gun or any other equipment that you need to test it with besides a TV and controllers? So always my first go-to is the HAS, the home arcade system or home arcade super gun. I forgot which was which, because it's designed number one with safety in mind, and it's got a million features. The Sentinel I still haven't had a chance to try personally, or I think I used an arcade cab with it, or an arcade setup with it, but I didn't really get to dig into it. That one supposedly is just as good as well as the minigun. But all of them are great solutions. But with the HAS, you just don't have to worry about anything at all. Voltage, sound, any of that other stuff. So that's the number one go-to. The other thing is that you're going to need a kick harness. So otherwise, all of the buttons on your MK2 board won't work. So you're going to need to probably maybe look up JNX and see if they have one for sale for you. That plugs right from the motherboard on the Mortal Kombat board into the HAS. And then the HAS uses Neo Geo style input ports, which are great because they're just on-off switches. So you could build your own arcade stick. You could use any arcade stick that's modded with the Neo Geo pinout. However, a great solution is the undammed adapters, which are USB on one end and Neo Geo style on the other. So you could plug any USB controller or USB fight stick into the HAS and use it that way. Now, I believe all of the other solutions that I mentioned as well also need a kick harness and also use the Neo Geo style. So the undammed adapters are something that you should have, in my opinion, just in case, or just wire up an arcade stick directly. And it is as simple as just add ground and signal to each of the buttons and in each of the arcade sticks and stuff like that. So good luck with your MK2 board. If you have any other questions, let me know. And if you ever see a second one for sale, please let me know, because the only ones I find are just scalper prices, which I refuse to support scalpers, even if I really loved something that much. So I just wanted it at a reasonable price. Schwink said a version of the action replay for GameCube that works with the Wii is for sale on Amazon. Do I know if this version supports SD Media Launcher for Switch? So I've never used one that has like dual purpose on it, or maybe I have and I just didn't realize it was marketed that way. But if it's a later version of the action replay, it should support SD. I think, I don't want to say numbers because I don't want to get this wrong, but something in my brain is telling me version 3 and up was able to access the SD card, but please don't quote me on that. I don't want you to spend money on something that doesn't work. I would just do a little bit more research on that, but if it's a newer version, I can't imagine that it wouldn't work with the SD reader. And once again, these SD readers can be the cheap $2 ones from Hong Kong. Like they're totally generic and work fine, especially if you're using the 2-reader version. One to boot with the Action Replay and the other one in the bottom, as I mentioned before. David Hernandez said he truly likes the channel and enjoys the content, but slowly stopped watching and stopped getting into the community. The whole scene in general makes it extremely hard to get into, and it feels like more and more of the channel is catering to super users rather than to people who are just trying to get into the scene. Heck, that goes for most of the community. He's lucky enough to be in a position to afford some of the products mentioned, and yet it's almost impossible to get anything without jumping through extreme hoops. So I completely feel you, David, and I'm really sorry about the beginner part of the site, and the only answer I have for that is time. There's not enough hours in the day to do any of the stuff that I want to do. And if it were up to me, there would be an equal amount, not counting the news posts, because the news posts are just whatever pops up and I want to let people know about. That's whatever's popping up, beginner, intermediate, expert, whatever. But as far as the guides and stuff, I really wish there was a way to make it an equal amount of beginner, intermediate, and advanced stuff on there. Because I really do want Retro RGB and, of course, the upcoming wiki to be something that anybody with just the slightest bit of knowledge and patience can go into and find what they need for retro gaming. And it's a matter of time, but I don't have any good answer for you at the moment. As for the community, I have to say that the retro gaming community has been way more welcoming and wonderful than many other communities that I've jumped into. It's a matter of where you go to hang out. So every place in person I've ever been to has been amazing. Every place online is not so much, though, and you need to kind of just step back and figure out which of the forums are the most toxic, which of the Discord channels are the worst, and there's even some that the main server is okay, but a couple of the sub servers on Discord are pretty awful. I've spoken pretty openly about the ones that I absolutely hate and refuse. I won't even say the name of it anymore because of how badly I was treated at some of these places after I dumped so much of my time into the community. So, it sucks, but there's going to be shitty people everywhere in the world, in every genre of thing that you do. You just got to know where to avoid. But generally speaking, the people in the retro gaming community are pretty awesome, and the only prerequisite that you have to get in is liking this stuff. And once again, especially in person, any of the expos and trade shows, and especially any of the local meetups have always been incredible. Complete strangers will just welcome you right in. You like this game too? All right, you're one of us. Come right in. Doesn't really matter who you are or where you come from. Have a seat. The last part, though, is something that frustrates everybody, including the sellers, having to jump through hoops in order to get stuff. The only thing about that you need to understand is that in order to have things made in bulk, it takes a lot of money, and then you have to be able to support all of that stuff. So while it would be so easy to say, okay, I'm going to do a run of 50 of this new product, I'll solder them all myself and, sell them, and, they'll be out of stock for a while, but it's a beta, don't worry. And then, you make the changes based on what you need, if there's any changes at all, and then you go make a run of 1,000 and they're in stock forever. That's a perfect way of doing things. Except, what if the demand's there and now you have to ship 1,000 things and you have a day job and a family and children and all that stuff? Or what if you spend all of that money or drop it on a credit card or something, and you have all of this inventory, and somebody that you didn't even realize was working on a project comes out with something better a week later, and you could still sell them, but it's going to trickle out and you probably end up with a lot of them. I mean, that could destroy a small business. So it's a rough thing to get around. I think a lot of people in the community are trying their best and doing a great job. And in fact, there's only one person in the community I know about that goes out of their way to not have enough, but all their products are pretty much irrelevant now. There's going to be alternatives for everything within a few months. So, other than that one, everything else is reasonable enough. So I hope someday to be able to help in some way to make these products more available to people without putting them in a bad position. So we're all trying. But, thank you for your honest comment and questions. I appreciate it. I hope the answer was good enough. Chris Syme had an interesting question. He said he saw a review of the game The Getaway for PS2, and it seemed that the only way it supports progressive scan mode is an RGSB, sync on green, and not component video. He tested the PAL version with the original disc, stock console, retro gaming cables, SCART cable, HD Retrovision cables, and the OSSC. Can someone test the NTSC version and see if it's the same? It's the only game he knows of that's locked to RGB only in 480p mode. I haven't had a chance to test that myself. I haven't even gotten a chance to look through these questions until just now, so I'll try to get to that if I can, but that's a really weird one, and that's one that, it's good to know the answer to just for the hell of it, but I'm kind of curious as to, could a game via software even be locked to that? So I'll try to remember to get to it as soon as I can. If nothing else, if I get to it, I'll do a very quick blurb on Retro RGB or on Twitter or something, just to get the stuff out there. But if anybody else has the ability to test this stuff, so you would basically just need to know what sync on green is and have an OSSC and have both a SCART cable and a component cable for the PlayStation 2. Seems like a lot, but it's a lot of us in the gaming community actually have that. So if anybody beats me to it, please just tweet at me or email me or something, and if not, I'll try to get to it. But that's a weird and interesting one. Thanks for pointing it out. Michael Kiramonte said, lately there's been a lot of stuff on Twitter with people trashing cheap emulation devices and cheap crappy cables, and we all know the reasons why. It's not the point of this, but there's been some backlash as a result from people not interested in making sizable investments in the kind of equipment that's covered in sites like mine, I guess. I totally get where both sides are coming from, so the question is Mr. the cheapest good option out there for someone wanting to play retro games in a way that's not plagued with issues, or are there other options that the community here knows about but isn't talked about much? The reason is because I feel like the retro gaming community does a good job of highlighting all the really good options out there, but also does a bad job of highlighting how bad the cheap options are without providing clear alternatives to people. Oh, preach, Michael. Without providing clear alternatives to people who want to get into this. So if I have a friend who wants to get into playing retro games, what's their best option without spending a ton of money that's community approved? Or am I reading too much into Voltar's sass? Well, first of all, don't ever read into Voltar's sass. He's one silly fucker, and I love him for it. But I agree with everything you said. And I do want to interject that very often people love to hatefully harass me on Twitter with only reading the first part of something that I post or write. I am a giant fan of most of the crappy options too, if they're used in the right environment. Everything except Pound. There's a whole backstory on why those companies are such giant pieces of shit. But other than that, there's actually, like I posted that whole article about the new Retron Game Boy thing. And the truth is, if you just want to say, you're like, I have a couple Game Boy games, let me play them and see if I like it or not, probably just going to be a nostalgia blast. Cheap stuff like that is perfect. It's absolutely great. You get to see your games on the screen. You get to play them with a physical controller rather than on probably your aging handheld that you don't want to have to mod or anything like that. And they're awesome for that. But I agree 100%. People just need to say, hey, this is a cheap toy. Treat it as such and you'll love it. But if you decide that you love these games, then, hey, here's these other options. To answer your question, as far as inexpensive stuff goes, the cheapest, easiest option are the things from Analog because they allow you to use your original cartridges and require little to no setup. We meaning the super nerds in the retro gaming community, always suggest that you tweak some of the settings, and I still don't understand why Analog doesn't ship them factory with some of the settings that we found to make it a little bit more accurate. But point being, all you really have to worry about with one of the Analog FPGA consoles is plug it into your TV, plug in your game, and start playing, and that's it. Once Mr. is set up, it's equally as straightforward, but it's still setup. And, I love the new cases out there. Some of them take a lot longer to assemble than others. I love all of the features, but I mean, if you've never done that before, it's a weekend, right? And I'm sure the Mr. Team's going to roll their eyes at me, and I'm going to get some funny, DMs for this, but it's the truth. If you're somebody that's never even set up a Raspberry Pi for gaming, which is, a chunk of the people who like retro games, then it's going to be complicated. But in my personal opinion, it's worth it, because it is a solution that, you could think of it as a great emulation box. That's oversimplifying the terrific work that goes into it. But at the end of the day, yeah, here's a box with, an SD card with a shitload of ROMs on it that works perfect, and everything's awesome. So at the moment, that is the cheapest. There's a few things about the whole how to get it set up and everything, and the interface and all that I'd like to see improved. But I talk to the Mr. Team all the time. One of them is in the midst of a move, so I'm not going to bother that person until they're all settled. But I do hope to at least help, because I am the middleman for a lot of this stuff. And while I'm not even remotely close to as smart as any of the people on the Mr. Team, I do have the pleasure of talking to both them and just the end users that just care about playing the games and nothing else. So I do feel like I could add a little bit to it to make it a little simpler to set up. But yes, the direct answer to your question is I do think it's the cheapest good option out there. Budget at least $300. I would say, because everything just starts to add up. It's my personal opinion. Budget like $400 and get at least the built-in USB hub, and I would just go right ahead and get the biggest RAM module, because why not, right? Do you really want to have to take everything apart and put it all back again if you need to upgrade in the future? I would just drop the cache once, and you're good to grow with for a while. And the other thing too is, much like a Raspberry Pi, the DE10 Nano that it's based off of can be used for a ton of different things. So I would just be confident buying that, knowing knowing that it's something that not only is it an excellent gaming experience, but should you ever not want to use it for gaming again, there's a few other things you could use it for. LD Decode is another one. If you're into laser discs, definitely look that one up. I did the interview. Just Google it right on the website and find it. But yeah, good question and post. And just on Twitter, you gotta just take it with a grain of salt. People really do enjoy being angry. And, not to get philosophical, but we're all still cavemen. And we're not running around all day clubbing woolly mammoths trying to get dinner, so our rage has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, it's very often at me on Twitter. So whatever, it's all good. But yes, good luck with your Mister. And you will absolutely enjoy it and have a great experience. And once again, other than Pound, if you really do want just a very quick, plug it in and go solution, just as a blast of nostalgia, Hyperkin's a perfect company for that. It's going to suck, but if your goal is to spend 15 minutes playing your old games for the cheapest possible, that's a great solution. I just wouldn't put hours into it, because you're going to start to notice the difference. Carl asked, let's say you're getting ready to play a SNES game where input lag isn't a concern, maybe an RPG or something. Would you rather play it on a Super NT or via an emulator on a modded Switch, which would give you portability? So that's a very interesting question, and that's not a scenario that I've ever run into, because I like just personal choice. There's no right or wrong answer to this, but I prefer to be on a couch with a big TV to experience my games. And if I do play something portable, I usually just play a mindless cell phone game, usually Solitaire or Mancala. I don't know if anybody remembers that game, but there's a digital version now, of course. But if that was the scenario that I was given, I would definitely rather play it on a Super NT. However, if you're asking my opinion on stuff like that, I mean, a modded Switch, any emulation device on the go is probably a good solution for something where input lag isn't a concern. I personally then, if I were in that scenario, would try to find one that adds a feature that you can't get in the original. So something silly like the Mode 7 HD rendering, that's just awesome to me. Maybe certain emulators would offer run-ahead mode and others don't. So I would just look into a feature that I couldn't get anywhere else, so that it's not just, all right, I'll play it on an emulator. I feel like I'm actually getting something, replacing one thing with another. So maybe I'm not getting exact cycle accuracy like the Mister or the Super NT, but I'm added HD rendering, so it kind of feels like a trade-off, and if input lag doesn't matter, then it's cool. So Yeah, so it's a very long answer to your very quick question is I would always prefer to use an accurate experience on a big TV, but if I had to use emulation for whatever reason, I would try to choose a way to emulate that adds something more, and I think I truly would enjoy that. I certainly really loved messing with the Beast NES's latest update and stuff like that, so hopefully that's a decent answer. Billy Gilmore asked if there's any HDMI switches I'd recommend for the Rad 2X. So that's an interesting question. You said you're picking up 2 or 3 Rad 2X cables. If you're only going to be using the Rad 2X into your TV, then I think pretty much any switch should work out. You just have to look, do you want auto switching? Do you want a remote? Do you need audio broken out? All that other stuff. But I think any would be fine. If you want to mix and match is where it would be the issue, and that's where Dave Dirkswizzler's post that I talked about before might be helpful, because the Rad 2X is only 480p, which means you don't have to worry about bandwidth issues, you don't have to worry about 4K 60, 4K 120, but if you're going to have your PlayStation 3 Rad 2Xs, your Switch, and your PS4 Pro and your Xbox One X, that's when all of the issues that everybody else was talking about apply. So if it's just for the Rad 2X cables, I would recommend getting the cheapest one, and it should be fine. If you're mixing and matching different stuff like that goes to 4K or even 1080p 60, to be honest, I would check Dirk Swizzler's post and try to find a switch that works best in your scenario. Moon Turtle said the HDMI to VGA adapters recommended for Mr. Analog Output are DACs, right? Does that mean the signal from the HDMI port is still digital even when it's set to output YPBPR? I ask because I'm wondering if it makes sense for me to use a very short VGA to RCA cable and a long HDMI cord with the adapter in order to reduce cost and analog interference with other cords in your setup. You nailed it, Moon Turtle. 100%. As far as I know, I mean, I'm pretty sure I got this one right, but yes, digital signal from the HDMI port to the analog DAC. So yes, I would strongly recommend using the shortest analog connectors possible, and then whatever length HDMI cable that you need. And of course, you'd have to plug both whatever analog console and the DAC into power at that point. I guess if the cable's really long, instead of using the pass-through, you could probably use 2 power adapters. I would hope that you could still. I haven't tried it myself, but if for whatever reason you have an issue, you would just then need to buy the same length USB adapter as you did the HDMI cable, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't be able to be powered by 2 different devices. So yes, that's it, and that's recommended, and and something that I think would be able to get the best option for people. And another thing too is I've already talked to a few people about how they're the best way for their setup, and you have a bunch of consoles plugged into your RGB monitor. I would add the DAC as one of those consoles, so that whenever you're plugging in one of your analog consoles, you could just plug in the analog console and everything else is already set up for you. You don't have to, mess with wires or anything like that. You could have the DAC set up, plugged into a port of the G-SCART switch, and the only time you need to move anything around is when you're using one of the analog consoles through it. I assume that their new analog pocket and whatever the other thing that they haven't announced yet, but they have the patent for, it would be, I don't mean to be rude, but it would be pretty stupid if they put out new products that didn't support other new products that they're releasing. So I'm going to have to assume that everything that they release from now on is going to be compatible with it. So Super NT, Mega SSG, SD, sorry, all these acronyms kind of get confusing at a point. The pocket, and then whatever else is coming. So yeah, the DAC is expensive, but it certainly is the right solution depending on your scenario and what consoles you might already own. So I was extra hard on it just because I was tired of everybody praising it without knowing what it was. Everybody meaning like Gizmodo and Gadget, but yeah, it's a great device. I have one here. I haven't used it since the last firmware update, but as it gets closer to release, I'll probably do more videos and stuff on it just to help people understand exactly the question that you had. So good call, and yeah, hopefully those things will be released soon. Before I close out the Q&A, I definitely wanted to say thank you and show my appreciation to everybody that sent well wishes, whether it was on social media or through the no Q&A post or anything like that. What happened is pretty embarrassing because I should be smarter than this, but I just hit a wall and burnt myself out. I think I got sick back in late October, never quite healed from that. still went balls to the wall like I enjoy doing, and then get sick again, and that turned into an infection. The test came back and they said that wasn't flu, wasn't pneumonia. It felt like when I had pneumonia a few years ago, but they said it was either a chest or a head infection. Gave me a bunch of antibiotics, and I'm finally starting to feel better. Once the antibiotics are done, that's when I'll actually feel better. Those things always kind of make me a little weird, but yeah, it's just, a bunch of my friends warned me, like, if you work these hours like they do, you're gonna hit a wall eventually, and there's nothing you could do about it. And I kind of arrogantly thought, like, no, I've been work hard, play hard my whole life. That doesn't happen to me. Forgetting that I'm fat and old now. So it did happen to me. I'll try to reschedule things so that I don't do that again. Recommended that I take a month off if I need to, but that's impossible. It's impossible both because I love doing all this stuff and I don't know how to relax. It was brutal the past few weeks. Like, I'd just say, oh, fuck it, and get up and start working, and then I'd get dizzy and start going to a coughing convulsion and have to lay back down again. I like being busy. I enjoy it. So that's hard for me. And also, I mean, it's anybody that's running a business, whether it's talking to a camera or it's making videos or anything else, like, you can't just walk away from it. So it's good and bad, but I'll try to be smarter about it in the future. I'll try to realize I'm not in my 20s anymore and I can't just work 80-hour weeks and then party too at the same time. So whatever. But thank you all for your well wishes. I'll try to not be a moron, and I do very much appreciate it. Okay, I think I'm all caught up from all the questions. I'll be back to doing it weekly again, and this is now a video that's going to be when it goes public, it's going to be a week after supporters get it, which I think kind of works itself out anyway, because that's kind of the format that I'm probably going to do for supporters in the future. And I do have some interesting updates about support services and things I'm going to be doing. It doesn't really affect YouTube or Patreon subscribers at all, but I'm going to be part of another very cool group that I'm very excited about. I'll talk more about it when I have time. I want to be able to get everything set up first. The only reason I haven't is obviously just, the health stuff. But I think that's going to be going on is supporters are going to get, with the exception of the weekly roundup, of course, supporters are going to get videos first. The Q&As would be at least a week first, and then it's going to go public, because I just there's a new platform out there that I'm part of that I'm very excited about, and I want to really dig into, because I think it's made by the people that love this stuff for the people that love this stuff, and not like a corporate entity like some of the others. So if you are new to all of these, there will probably never be a 2-week break again, ever. So thank you very much for being patient if you're a new supporter. And any questions that you have at all, anything whatsoever, just ask wherever you find the newest post, wherever it is that you support, the newest Q&A related post. And because the way these things work out is I can't really figure out which are older posts and questions on the older ones. So just any new post or any new question you have, posted on the latest Q&A post. I disabled the comments for YouTube because this is a supporter thing, but somebody's telling me, or a few people have told me that that's killing my algorithm thing to have a bunch of videos with no comments on it. But I don't know how I'm going to have to handle that in the future. I just know that no matter what, this is a thank you for everybody that supports. So I'm going to be answering questions only on the support pages. So please just remember that if the comments are left on, or if I have to turn them on because of YouTube's mighty Big Brother rules or anything like that. But anyway, thank you so much for your time and your support, and I will see you next week.